In this video, I'm going to show how to calculate a grade in a course where the components of the grade are attendance, homework, labs, and tests, and they have various weights. So I have sort of all the components then finally on the test sheet, but let's get the other sheets ready and copy the necessary information over to that sheet. So attendance, we have our sort of made up students, and it's an X if they've attended, an L if they were late, and just a blank if they weren't there. So we're going to give them, if they get an X, they get a full credit for the day. L, they're going to get half credit for the day, and then we want a percentage. All right. So first we're going to do a COUNTIF. So where is COUNTIF? There's COUNTIF. And I'm going to count Abigail Adams, and I'm counting right now X's. And there were, you can see here by the days, there were 27. So I used a COUNTIF. Here was the range, and here was the criterion. Counted if it was an X. So let me go just down one for now. And then over here on Susan B. Anthony, we see one. I'm counting, let me count not X's and subtract from 27. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there were 7 days that Susan B. Anthony didn't have like a full attendance count. So that 20 seems right. Okay. So let's copy that down. Now let's do something similar here. COUNTIF, and now we're going to count if in the same range. And our criteria is if it's an L, and I'm going to divide, I have to divide by the 2 somewhere. I'll divide by the 2 here. Okay. So Abigail Adams was always there, so it's a 0. But now for Susan B. Anthony here, Susan was late 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and we're giving her half credit, so she gets 2 days credit there. So that seems to make sense. Okay, there we go. And then we are going to add up their full attendance and their halftime attendance for being late. And then I'm going to, I can just divide by the 27, or I can do a count. Let's do no, let's not do a count, because then I don't know what the count's going to do on the blanks. So let me just divide by the 27 and play it safe. And then I'm going to multiply that by 100 to turn it into a percentage. There we go. So Abigail Adams had 100% attendance. And there we go. All right. Adam Smith did not like to come to class. All right, so there we go. So that is our attendance. Sort of, so we just had some attendance sheet where we had X's and L's, and we've done a COUNTIF, turn them into numbers, turn that into a percentage, and that then I'm going to take a copy and go over to the test, and there's a thing here for attendance. I'm going to paste values. There we go. Okay. What is next? Homework. Okay, so the homework's just average. So I have the zeros put in. If I didn't have zeros put in, I'd have to sort of add things up and divide by the number of homeworks. But with zeros in place, I can just use the average function. So I'm just going to take the average of all of these and copy that down. Okay. So none of my students were very good at doing their homework here. I'm going to copy, I think before I copied the header, this time I'm not going to copy the header. All right, and then I'm going to take that over here and paste values. All right, lab will be the same as homework for the most part, and again, since we put in zeros, there were, I can use average. Otherwise, I might need to do sum or something like that and divide by the number of labs. But with the zeros in place, I can just use average, copy that down, and again, I have all these students are bad students, it seems, so not doing all their labs. But we can add a student at the end who's a good student. And I'm going to paste special there, values, okay. And so this I need to throw out. That was a different kind of attendance. Okay. So now we're on. So we've dealt with the attendance and the homework and the lab, so we're ready for the test. There were 3 tests and a final in this course, and then if the final is the lowest score, it counts as a regular test. The final was all like in a longer period, and it was cumulative. So if it is not the lowest test, it will replace the lowest test. So we're taking a test out. So we're either so we're going to make a copy of the final, and so then it will count twice, or if it is the lowest score, then it will only count once. Okay. So we're just going to say here is equal to there. And I can do this without making a copy, but it's just a little easier to see since we are counting it twice, just sort of put it in twice and then, okay. So what are we going to do? We want to drop a test. So we're going to add up 5 tests, subtract off the minimum, which will be the lowest test. And then, so we will then be adding up 4 tests. So we will divide by 4 to get the average of the 4 scores we are keeping. So we're going to do a sum over these 5. We're going to subtract the minimum of the same 5. And then we're going to divide by 4. So there is the test average. Okay. So now we have a test average with a drop test. We have a homework average. We have a lab average. We have an attendance average. Pardon me. And now we want to do the weights. And we are doing 0.5 for 50% times the test average plus 0.1 for 10% times the homework average plus 0.3 times the lab for 30% times the lab average and 0.1 for 10% times the attendance average. And there we have again 50% for tests, 10% for homework, 30% for lab, 10% for attendance. Okay. And again, so we'll just pick one of the students and make them a good student in a minute. All right, to make sure our calculation makes sense. And then what? Now we're going to do a VLOOKUP table with the grades. So I have this sort of grading scheme down here to use, except it's not ready to use. In a VLOOKUP, a range is represented by the lowest number of the range. We have that. The A is a 94 to 100. And so I have it being represented by the lowest number. I have the numbers I look up in the earlier column, or the column on the left. So that makes sense. But the third thing I need for a VLOOKUP, for a good VLOOKUP table, is that they should be in ascending order, not in descending order. So I want to come and take this and do a data sort, and I'm going to sort it on column B from the smallest to the largest in ascending order. So that flipped my grading scheme. Now I'm set up for a proper VLOOKUP table. So I'm going to say equals VLOOKUP. And I'm going to look up the student's grade. I'm going to look it up in my table. I'm going to come back and do dollar signs in a minute. I want column 2, and I want an approximate match. So these scores are not exactly in my VLOOKUP table because I don't have a 78.5 in my VLOOKUP table, so it's an approximate match. And then I want to come back here and put in the dollar sign. So I'm going to copy this formula down. And so I don't want any changes as I copy down. So this student got a C, 78, 78. You had to get to a 79 to get a C plus, so but a 76 was a C, so 70. And there was no rounding. If we wanted rounding, we could round the scores and then look them up, but we didn't put in any rounding. Okay. So let's make somebody good. Let's make Wilma Rudolph. Let's make her a very good student. So just give her hundreds across the board. And when we gave her hundreds across the board, she had 100 average and she received an A. So it seems like the formulas make sense. Again, so we went through an attendance component, used the COUNTIF function, another COUNTIF function, and then calculated a percentage from that. In homework, they were already sort of percentages, and we had these zeros in place for if they didn't do the assignment. So then we could just use the average function. Same thing for the lab. We copied everything over. When you copy and paste, you have to be sure to sort of, for me in Windows, a right click and get a context sensitive menu and paste by value because I want the numbers, not the formulas. Excel by default usually copies formulas. I want to copy numbers in this case, or values. So then we copied all that information over. We figured out how to do the drop test. So we made a copy of the final because it could count twice. And then we added up the 5 scores. We subtracted off the lowest score by taking the minimum. Then we were effectively adding the top 4 scores. So we divided by 4. And then we did the various weightings. 0.5 represented the 50% for tests. 0.1 represented the 10% for homework. 0.3 represented the 30% for lab. And 0.1 represented the 10% for homework. And then we used a VLOOKUP to turn a number score into a letter grade. And what we originally saw here was not in the right order, was not in ascending order. So we used a data sort to get the right order. And then we used VLOOKUP. We looked up the score. We looked it up in the data table. We put dollar signs. So when we copied down, it stayed put. So when we copy down, it stays 23 and 33. We want to show what was in the second column, which is the letter grade, and we were doing approximate things, not exact things. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks for your attention.